Welcome to the Mash and Soul Podcast.
Hustling, 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 hustling. Every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling.
And welcome everyone to the Mash and Soul Podcast, UFC 230 Special Edition. I'm your host Soul, coming to you from sunny Southern California, and I'm here with my co-host or special guest for the night, Shaf Chaudhry, all the way from Brooklyn, New York. How you doing, Shaf?
I'm doing great, man. How are you doing over there?
Doing awesome, man. Doing great. You know, it's starting to get a little chilly over here, but we don't got no winter storms you guys are getting, thankfully.
Chilly as in what? It's 70 degrees at night, or?
It's like 58, 68 degrees. Might need a little fleece. Might need a fleece at night, sometimes. But it's definitely not as cold as it is on the East Coast. That's for sure.
All right. Got the point there.
Yeah. I've been doing awesome. We obviously had the last time we did this, we did the UFC 229 recap, and of course that was. The UFC 229 card was an all-timer, right? So we had a ton to talk about. Still, even since, what was that, the first week of October, still so much has happened since then, right? It's been crazy.
Yeah, a lot of new things going on. I mean, outside the Khabib and Conor fight, a lot of new things have happened in the world of MMA.
Yeah, that's for sure, man. A lot of news, a lot of speculation, and of course, we have UFC 230 that is coming up this Saturday night at MSG, headlined by the Derrick Lewis Daniel Cormier fight, which was kind of put on pretty much as a result of UFC 229. So definitely going to get to that, get to the card, talk about some of the fights that we like, and what we expect as far as outcomes are concerned. But before we get started on the card, as we said, a lot of news, a lot of speculation in the world of not just the UFC, but MMA in general. So let's get started, man. Let's get straight to the whole Khabib situation, right? So Khabib right now, for those of you who don't know, he's just on his victory lap. He's touring the Middle East right now, meeting with Arab dictators, and being treated like royalty, meeting with like Erdogan and like these random Arab countries.
Meeting with possible Al Qaeda leaders as well. Who knows?
Yeah, God knows what he's doing.
Vladimir Putin.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin. He's meeting with every single strong-armed dictator in Eastern Europe and the Middle East. But everyone's treating him like royalty. I think I saw a couple of videos where he's meeting with like the military, or, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu camps, and it's pretty cool though, because he is being, you could tell his level of stardom has rose to a level that we never thought would ever come to be. So he is on his victory lap, and Conor of course is doing his thing. One thing I'll give
in the corner.
Yeah, selling whiskey at the corner or the liquor store, and he's doing this. I'll give him credit for this. He's not sulking. He is just he's living his life right now.
Yeah, the guy's making a killing with this proper whiskey brand right now. I mean, him losing, he still got his exposure. I mean, the proper whiskey was on the UFC Octagon. It was, basically advertised. He had free advertisement, so he's killing it in the whiskey game right now. So props to him.
Yeah, again, props to him. He's not really sulking. He's doing his thing. So Conor's doing his thing. Khabib's doing his thing. But moving forward, of course, there's been a lot of speculation as far as who Khabib is going to fight next, right? And I think the whole Khabib-Conor rematch speculation just kind of died down a little bit. I think people kind of realized, taking a step back, that that's probably not the best route to go for either guys.
Yeah, considering it was so lopsided, there's really not much to see.
Yeah, I mean, I mean, what Conor's not going to become some miracle, some top level grappler and wrestler in 6 months, right? Like that's not going to happen. So what are we really going to see? What benefit is there going to be from that, from fighting in 3 to 6 months? Nothing. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so the three fights that are out there that it has been a lot of speculation for is one is obviously the Tony Ferguson fight, which makes the most logical sense because this is a fight that they've been trying to get together for a while now. I think it was 3 or 4 attempts, and for whatever reason, each time one guy pulling out, guys getting injured, it just never happened. But of course, they're the top 2 guys in their division, so that's definitely on the table. And then there is the Khabib GSP fight that is gaining some momentum as well in the background, which I'm a little surprised by, to be honest.
Right.
So that's been gaining steam. And the third option, which we'll just get out of the way right now, is the Khabib Mayweather fight. And for the love of God, I am praying that nobody wastes their time in putting together this fight or promoting it. And it sounds like it's kind of dying out a little bit from based on what Dana White has said recently. What are your thoughts on the 3 potential matchups, and what do you think is what are you looking forward to seeing the most of those 3?
So I'm gonna start from the order of what I want to see least to what I want to see the most.
Sure.
And it's almost laughable to even picture a fight with Khabib Nurmagomedov versus Floyd Mayweather. Nobody in their right mind, any educated combat sport fan, does not want to see that fight. It was one thing to have Conor McGregor versus Floyd Mayweather. That's a different story. Yes, I get it. Khabib dropped Conor McGregor. He dominated him, but let's not lose sight. Conor McGregor, regardless of him losing to Khabib Nurmagomedov, is still the best striker in MMA. And it's not just the striking he brought to the table with Floyd Mayweather. It's about selling the pay-per-view. And Conor McGregor is a notorious shit talker, along with Floyd Mayweather. So there's a whole spectacle that goes along with a fight like that Khabib just purely can't bring. It just wouldn't be the same thing. Khabib's a grappler. He's not really a boxer. I don't think that's something that anybody would want to see. I don't think that would even be competitive. I mean, the only way Khabib would beat Floyd Mayweather is just based on his sheer size, because he is just much bigger than him, because he's much bigger than Conor McGregor. So just by sheer brute and strength, that's the only way he'd beat Floyd Mayweather. But if we talk about pure technique, there's no way he belongs in the same ring as Floyd Mayweather. So let's eliminate that. I hope that fight never happens, and I hope it doesn't get any more publicity.
Yeah, and vice versa. The other option was potentially Mayweather doing MMA, and it's like, why?
No, yeah.
Why are we gonna see either of those? They're both gonna be completely one-sided and lopsided.
Like Conor McGregor, a guy who's been a mixed martial artist for many years, if he can't get his grappling on point, what makes you think Floyd Mayweather can get his grappling on point? I mean, Let's just face it, that's just a pure money fight. So let's not even entertain that.
Yeah.
And here's another thing. Well, before I want to bring up my other point, the next fight they're mentioning is George St. Pierre versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. I like this fight. I love this fight. I would like to see this fight, but not right now. I'd like to see this maybe after Conor McGregor fights Tony Ferguson. Because right now, yes, Khabib Nurmagomedov is the best lightweight. Can he call himself the greatest lightweight of all time? No, he cannot, in my opinion. I believe he has to beat the man that hasn't lost since 2012. He needs to beat Tony Ferguson. Like you said before, that fight has been, I believe, booked 3 to 4 times. It's been scrapped 3 or 4 times. These two need to meet, and then we will have the answer who the best lightweight is in UFC history. I believe Tony Ferguson is the guy that deserves the fight. He's had, for some reason, he's always there to get the title fight, but something always happens where Conor McGregor comes into the picture. They have a money fight with Nate Diaz. The guy just gets unlucky, and I believe now's his time. He really deserves this fight. If he gets past Tony Ferguson, then I would like to see him fight George St. Pierre. And I'm pretty sure George St. Pierre cannot make 155. it would have to be a catchweight bout about 165. So before we can have a fight at 165, I believe we need to have that fight at 155 for the belt between Tony Ferguson versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's my opinion. I do not want to see a GSP fight just yet. I'd like to see it in the upcoming future.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And, you know, Tony Ferguson is, well, I mean, clearly he's the number one contender at this point, right? He's the number one contender. As you said, they on paper, stylistically, everything. This is just a great potential matchup. And if people don't remember from UFC 223, before this guy slipped during some media event he was doing towards ACL, the shit talking between them was pretty awesome.
Yeah, that's a fight that could sell.
Yeah, do you remember that press conference they had? It was over the phone. It was a press conference on the phone. It was amazing between Tony and Khabib, and so it was really, really entertaining. So I definitely think it's something that can sell. I mean, yeah, is GSP versus Khabib probably gonna drum up probably some more pay-per-view fights, pay-per-view sales? Yeah, probably. But as far as the order is concerned, yeah, I agree. It doesn't make sense, and it's just a perfect segue, right? Because like you have the Khabib Ferguson fight. Let's just say Khabib wins. There's been a lot of talk about the 165 weight class kind of being instituted into UFC. It's a perfect segue. Have that be your first fight, right? Because that's it's a big money fight, big names. It's a perfect way to open up that division. And I agree with you. Listen, I've seen GSP in person at the Renzo Gracie Academy when he was preparing for his last fight. And dude, he is not a lightweight fighter. And he already has health issues, and he already has his colitis condition that he has with his stomach. I hope he doesn't try to fight at 155, because I don't want to see a legend like that try to cut down weight, and God knows what's going to happen to him, right? Like, he's
going to have some serious kidney injury if he tries cutting weight like that.
Yeah, it's just a bad idea. And yeah, I think the order that you put it in, I think that's probably the best route moving forward. And let's hope the UFC kind of rolls the punches in that fashion, in that order.
And let's also face it that Khabib Nurmagomedov, if he fights GSP, he has nothing to lose in that fight. He comes across as a winner because he's fighting a guy that's bigger than him.
Yep.
He's fighting a superstar. Tony Ferguson, he has a lot to lose in that fight. And I believe he needs a fight like that where he has his legacy to lose before he can earn himself a super fight like that.
Yeah.
You got to earn that.
Agreed for sure. Okay, cool. Awesome. So touching on our first topic, before we get to the UFC 230, the second topic I wanted to get into, this is some really interesting stuff. So for those of you who have not been in the loop as to what's going on, there was actually a trade. I guess you say in technicality, it was a trade that happened in an MMA between the UFC and ONE FC, which are two different fighting promotions. And we have never seen anything the likes of this before. And what happened was the UFC traded Demetrious Johnson, who is one of the best UFC fighters of all time.
Pound for pound number one.
Pound for pound number one. Obviously, he just lost he lost recently to Henry Cejudo, but generally speaking, one of the best fighters of all time in the UFC, and still in his prime, right? Like he's not past him. He's still in his prime.
Yeah, I mean that loss to Henry Cejudo is somewhat controversial. I mean, some people believe that he won the fight, so it's hard to argue.
Yeah, so they traded him away to ONE FC for Ben Askren, who is a guy who not too many people know. So he actually fights in the 171 weight class, right? Am I correct?
So, yeah, as you mentioned, so not too many people, casual fans, know about Ben Askren, but if you're a hardcore MMA fan, you should be super excited to finally see Ben Askren in the UFC. Ben Askren, for many of you that don't know, was a welterweight champ for Bellator for many years, completely dominated the competition, never lost a round. And then he transitioned over to ONE FC because he was getting paid a lot of money over there, and just dominated the competition at ONE FC and became a champion there. So a little background, Ben Askren, is Ben Askren's actually known as one of the best like NCAA wrestlers of all time. He's a two-time NCAA wrestling champion, and he's probably known as one of the most unorthodox, funkiest wrestlers of all time, and which transitioned him well into MMA. Basically, once he grabs a hold of you, and once he's on top of you, it's pretty much over. You're not getting up with Ben Askren. His style is not the most exciting, but it's obviously very effective because he's undefeated. And for many years, Dana White avoided getting Ben Askren in the UFC because the speculation was that Ben Askren is going to beat a lot of top UFC guys that the UFC is trying to promote and make their stars, and he's just going to take them out and lay on top of them and leave the UFC with no potential stars. So that's why Dana White has avoided Ben Askren for many years.
Yeah, it's really kind of a shame because I think for the people that are in the know for MMA have known Ben Askren for a long time, and really he's basically almost, some people kind of compare him. He's not necessarily a ground and pound guy, but a lot of people compare him somewhat to Khabib as far as like his level of grappling and wrestling.
Right.
He's a high level of wrestler and grappler and fighter in general. And, as far as him not being in the UFC, as you said, had nothing to do with talent. He's always had the talent. He was a very talented guy, had a lot of success at Bellator, had a lot of success at ONE FC. And this has been something that's been kind of brewing for a while. And a lot of people have been saying, when is Ben Askren going to get a chance to go in the UFC? Because this is kind of like an inevitable fact, really.
Yeah, this is happening. It's a shame that it happened when he's like 34 years old.
Yeah, and that's the thing that you have to mention also. He is 34, but
he hasn't taken much damage in his career, so.
Yeah, he's dominated. He's 18-0 as a pro. So he is undefeated, as is the same as Khabib, which also makes this very, very interesting.
So we mentioned 3 matchups. That's a 4th matchup that a lot of people are mentioning, but maybe not right now, but in the upcoming future. That's like a grappler's dream to see these two lock it up.
Yeah, and maybe guys who are kind of more casual fans who aren't crazy with the ground game and grappling and wrestling and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and they're not going to be crazy about it. But I mean, these are 2 of the best guys in the world at what they do. And it would really be amazing to see 2 guys who, as of right now at least, are undefeated, to get a chance to fight. And so this whole dynamic is very interesting because obviously finally Ben Askren's getting a chance at the UFC. Should have been a while ago, as you said. And then Demetrious Johnson leaving the UFC. That's really interesting too, man, because he's one of the main stars of the UFC. In my opinion, at least, he's one of the top guys. It's crazy.
So Demetrious Johnson leaving the UFC, it's not very surprising because the guy is accomplished and he's everything you could possibly accomplish in the UFC. He's got the longest streak in terms of defending the belt. And Dana White has even said it himself. He said that he let Demetrious Johnson go because he felt like Demetrious Johnson wasn't getting the love and respect from the fans that he kind of deserved. And at this point in Demetrious Johnson's career, he might as well go somewhere else and get paid. He has nothing left to prove. And the other thing a lot of people might not know is Demetrious Johnson's head coach, Matt Hume, is a vice president of operations for ONE FC. So that's another reason why he's going to ONE FC. He's going to get paid. He will get paid there.
Yeah, and so this is another thing that is kind of really interesting. So ONE FC, or I guess now it's really not called ONE FC as much anymore. It's called like ONE Championship. Right. So they were launched. They launched in 2011, and they're really coming up really quickly. And let me tell you something: these guys are dishing out money because not only did they just get Demetrious Johnson, before this, they got Eddie Alvarez.
Yes, they got Eddie Alvarez too recently, and this is great for MMA actually.
Yeah, and Eddie Alvarez was on an interview. it might have been the Ariel Helwani show, and they were kind of talking to him about his situation because his contract was up with the UFC, and he was a free agent,
Yeah.
and he was shopping himself between Bellator, ONE FC, and the UFC, and he said it was the best decision he's ever made because he was able to maximize his self worth, and he got the best deal he could get, and he got an 8-figure deal, which is amazing. I mean,
Yeah,
and
props to him. Props to
yeah,
him. He was a Bellator champ. He was a UFC champ. What more does a guy have to prove? Like, he might as well. I mean, he's older now. He might as well get some easy fights and make some money. And this is so good for fighters in general, because before we had a monopoly when it came to MMA organizations. It was just the UFC. Whatever they offered is whatever you're going to get. Now you got a healthy competition amongst Bellator, UFC, and ONE FC or ONE Championship, whatever you want to call it. So it raises these other it basically causes these organizations to raise their pay scale now.
yeah, and it's great, and it's so great for these fighters because these guys put so much on the line, and I honestly think that the UFC has not paid these guys nearly enough money. I think they've been taking advantage of them for a long time, and I think this is awesome. I think it is interesting though because there is almost now. There was before it was mostly just the UFC. Then Bellator started to come up, and Bellator is also a pretty well-run organization, in my opinion.
Yeah.
And I think better than almost the UFC in some sense. And the ONE FC is also now coming up. They're dishing out a lot of money. They're actually run by a guy who is a former hedge fund manager, really smart guy.
Yeah, a guy based out of Singapore, I believe.
Yeah, he's based out of Singapore. He actually used to train at the Renzo Gracie Academy as well in New York City when he was working in finance. Okay. Really smart guy. So you have these other organizations coming up by some really smart guys with great leadership, great management. It'll be interesting to see what happens because I mean, for me, at least as a fight fan, I want to see the best versus the best, right? And so we'll see if are there going to be mergers in the future? Are there going to be co-promotions in the future? It'll be interesting to see, right? Like,
yeah.
I think there's got to be some sort of combination between the three organizations, and this may be an opening to that, right? This trade.
Yeah, I mean, we would never be I don't think we'd ever discuss this, that one organization traded a fighter to another organization. I mean, the fact that this happened, you're right. I mean, who knows, in the upcoming future, we might see a fighter from one organization fight another fighter from another organization. It's not out of the question anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, hey, they did it with Conor and Mayweather, right? I mean, so that was
those are two different sports. I mean, that's probably harder to do.
Yeah, 100%. So definitely, really interesting stuff going on, and I think that the DJ and the Askren trade is definitely opening the doors to a lot of possibilities. So it should be really interesting to see. So yeah, that's been what's going on since UFC 229, which of course was really a huge hit for the UFC and MMA as a whole, and which segues into the next event, which is UFC 230 at Madison Square Garden. Now, I'm going to, for a lot of you guys who are kind of a little bit more casual fans, I'm just going to be honest, Chef. You can give your opinion on this as well.
Yeah,
UFC. Yeah, go ahead. I'm gonna let you go. You're gonna go ahead.
I mean, listen. Me and you aren't getting paid to promote the UFC or paid to promote the sport of MMA. So me and we can agree that we're gonna keep things real. We're gonna tell you if we think a card is great, worth watching, or we're gonna tell you if we think a card blows. Considering this is MSG, this is probably not the best card, especially when you compare it to UFC 229. Is this a bad card? It's not a bad card. It's just not as good as UFC 229. Agreed, Sohel?
Yeah, definitely not. And what people have to understand too is like, because I was watching this with like my brother-in-law too, like UFC 229, and not only was, I mean, yeah, the card was already good, but the output, the fights were even better than advertised. You know what I mean? Like all the fights were great, especially on the main card. So regardless, it was gonna be hard to live up to. But generally speaking, this card is, it's okay. It's solid. It actually was going to be better before, but obviously some guys had to drop out because of injuries. The Nick Diaz, God, why am I forgetting his name for a second?
Just Dustin Poirier.
Dustin Poirier, that's right. Who's one of the main contenders in that division. Dustin Poirier got injured actually, and of course Nate Diaz being Nate Diaz, he completely backed out of the whole thing because he's just the biggest baby alive nowadays when it comes to fights. So that he backed out, and then it was Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold. Luke Rockhold got injured as well.
But we still have a good matchup there that we'll talk about later.
Yeah, that we'll talk about later. And of course, the late main event that was formed because of UFC 229. Derrick Lewis, obviously his crazy knockout that he had at the end of that fight.
Hold on, Soha. Let's not forget the main event they put before Daniel Cormier, Derrick Lewis.
Oh yeah! Oh my God!
Briefly.
Oh, we're gonna get into that because we're gonna start at the beginning of this card. So we'll start at the prelims, and we won't talk too much about this, but there are a few fights I guess that are worth talking about a little bit. And the first one we'll talk about is, as you were alluding to, Sijara Eubanks. This is how ridiculous this was, and this is why I really questioned the leadership at UFC.
Yeah.
Sijara Eubanks was going to headline this event
with a 3-2 record.
The 3-2 record as for the main event on this card.
For a title bout with Valentina Shevchenko.
Yeah. And which is ridiculous. And now, what ended up happening, long story short, of course, the whole Derrick Lewis thing happens. He knocks out Volkov, and they call up Daniel Cormier. They're like, hey, can you fight on 3-4 weeks' notice? And he's like, probably not, but I guess against Derrick Lewis, I'll probably go do it. So they end up being the main card. And then they tell Sijara Eubanks, like, hey, take a hike. Because all the feedback from everybody was like, what? That's the main card at MSG? And of course they cut her out, and then she freaked out, and they, I guess as just a little bit of a hey, sorry, they just put her on the prelim card, which is what a fall from grace.
Exactly where she belongs.
Yeah, it is.
Not even on the prelim, she belongs in the
early prelims.
Early prelims, the one they don't even show on regular TV.
Yeah, it's so ridiculous, but somehow she still is on this card. She is in the prelims. And so this is also kind of weird. So she's facing Roxanne Modafferi, right?
Yeah.
And I've never seen her before in my life. Okay, so she looks like a nerdy mom. Roxanne Modafferi. She looks like a nerdy mom who teaches biology in middle school. This is the most bizarre. If you guys go online and you look up at the fight card and you look up these two, or even look up when they had the face off. It's just the strangest thing ever.
So I'm gonna clarify something. Roxanne Modafferi is actually a pioneer when it comes to women's MMA. She's actually one of the first women to get started in MMA and whatnot. But that doesn't mean she's good. She's still pretty bad.
Yeah, she's 22 and 15.
She's terrible.
Yeah.
And Sijara Eubanks, I don't even think she has a Wikipedia page. That's how terrible and unknown she is. Enough. Let's stop talking about them. Enough with the.
Yeah, this is ridiculous. This is so ridiculous. Yeah, but we had to talk about it just because of the background between Sijara Eubanks as being the main card, which is so ridiculous. I cannot believe they even thought that was a plausible main main event on the main card. It's just ridiculous. Anyway, moving on. The other fight on the prelim, I guess, that has some substance to it is the Jason Knight, the kid versus Jordan Rinaldi. And Jason Knight was kind of one of the up and coming prospects in the UFC, right? And he's been on a 3-fight losing streak. And I don't know if he's smoking too much crystal meth or whatever he's doing, but he's definitely been on. He's definitely been kind of fallen off pretty quickly. It's probably his last chance, really, to kind of gain any momentum. So what do you think about this fight?
So Jordan Rinaldi too. I think he lost his last fight to actually a Long Island fighter named Gregor Gillespie. I would say that this fight both of them going to come hard, and they're both fighting for their UFC contracts right now. I would say that loser of this fight goes home. They're out of the UFC because they're both coming off losses and haven't really done much in the UFC to prove their stay here.
Yeah, I agree. And it just goes to show too, because if you said 2 years ago that Jason Knight would be fighting for his, professional UFC life, you're thinking he'd be crazy, right? Because he was, again, one of the
he's
top.
an up and coming guy, well trained. He's his head coach is actually Alan Belcher, who was like a UFC veteran at middleweight. So he's obviously well trained, has the talent, but it's the UFC. This is where all like the best MMA fighters are. So he just hasn't been able to beat guys that are in like the top 15. So
Yeah,
if
and
you can't do
he's
that, there's really no point in staying in the UFC.
yeah, he's definitely been disappointing over the past
Year or
year
two.
plus, year or two, yeah. So yeah, so the prelims, again, this card in general isn't that great, and I think the prelims are kind of representation of that as well. But I guess this fight may actually catch some eyes. Let's see what happens with that.
The prelim has basically a lot of fighters out of the Serra-Longo camp right here in from Long Island, like Chris Weidman's gym. Basically a lot of New York guys from that camp, a few guys from Queens also fighting in the prelims. Not such big names that the casual fan would know about. Guys that are basically trying to establish themselves in the UFC.
Yeah, and they tend to do this a lot, especially when they do in certain locations. Like I know whenever they do in like I think was it Nassau Coliseum they did? I forgot.
Right.
Yeah. They got a lot of Long Island fighters who probably had no business being in a major UFC event, but they give them a shot anyway. So yeah, so that's the main, I guess, fights in the prelims. So moving on to the main card. We have, so we'll get the first two out of the way because it's Roberson and Marshman, sorry, the Hammer, which fighting out of the 185-pound division, and David Branchin, Jared Cannonier. I can never see these names, man. Cannonier, jeez. Fighting also out of the 185-pound division. Again, these are two guys that aren't really. I was also kind of surprised they made it to the main card.
Well, in all respects, David Branch deserves to be on the main card. David Branch is a legit top 10 middleweight of the world. He's a former champion of what they used to call World Series of Fighting, but now became Professional Fighting League. So
yeah,
David Branch was actually a 185-pound champ there and a 205-pound champ there. He just hasn't really established himself in the UFC as of yet. He's lost to Luke Rockhold, I believe.
Yeah, which isn't anything to be too ashamed of. But between these two fights, what are you looking forward to seeing out of these two?
I'm not looking forward to seeing any of these two, to be honest with you. I mean, I do expect David Branch to win dominantly against Jared Cannonier. If he doesn't, that really shows the disparity of talent between the UFC and an organization like World Series of Fighting / Professional Fighting League. It shows you that a champ from that organization, if he loses, cannot hang with the average talent in the UFC.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I personally don't have much interest in watching either of these fights. Although I will say one very interesting point about this main card is that 4 of the 5 fights are in the 185-pound weight class.
Yeah,
which is very, very rare that you'll see that, where 4 of the 5 are all the same weight class. That is interesting. So a third fight that is on this card that actually is pretty interesting.
Yeah,
is Derrick Brunson, who's the number 6 contender in the 185-pound weight class, versus Israel Adesanya.
Israel Adesanya.
Adesanya, sorry. who's
Yeah.
the number 9 ranked contender in the division, who's actually a very talented guy, and as of right now is undefeated, 14-0. Again, one of the up and coming prospects in the UFC. Tell me about this fight and who do you like?
So we got Derrick Brunson, who I guess you could label as a journeyman. He's got notable wins. He's 18-6, notable wins over Lyoto Machida and Uriah Hall. But like I said, he's a journeyman at best. When it comes to top talent, he's lost to all the top talent like Jacare Sousa, Yoel Romero, Anderson Silva, and the current 185 champ Robert Whitaker. So he hasn't been able to beat the top 5. He's been able to beat everyone basically outside that top 5. So Derrick Brunson serves as a good measuring stick as to where you belong in the elite of that division. And Israel Adesanya is one of those guys that's up and coming. As you said, he's ranked number 9. Derrick Brunson's a grappler. Israel Adesanya is probably one of the most well-known kickboxers. He was a glory kickboxer prior to making a transition into MMA. We don't know too much about his ground game. So the question here is going to be, can he handle the wrestling of Derrick Brunson? Will his takedown defense survive against Derrick Brunson? I mean, he hasn't really. We could say, is the first time he's fighting a wrestler of Derrick Brunson's caliber. So it'll be interesting. And my prediction, to be honest with you, because I haven't seen Israel Adesanya fight a pure wrestler, I think this is where his hype train is going to come down in this fight. I mean, Israel Adesanya is 3-0 in the UFC, but he's beaten guys with not an extensive grappling background. He beat Rob Wilkinson, Brad Tavares, and your homeboy, a guy that you've trained with before in sunny California, Marvin Vittori.
Oh, that's right.
So,
and Marvin is also he is more of a striker.
yeah.
So I could see that happening, and I don't really see that as a challenging matchup for Israel. That is, as in like it fits to his liking, right? So, and Derrick Brunson's not that type of guy. He's a different kind of fighter.
So like I'll say, like Israel Adesanya, like no homo, he's a good-looking black guy. I mean, I think he's done some modeling in the past. He's very charismatic on camera. His striking style is very exciting. So he's obviously a guy that the UFC is trying to push. He's from New Zealand. They want to get that market out there.
Yeah.
And he's Nigerian. So, he brings, an African market. He has a New Zealand market. He's good looking, flashy striker, can talk. Obviously a guy that the UFC wants to promote, wants to make him a star. So his first 3 fights in the UFC, they've given him favorable matchups to make him look good. This is the matchup where it's probably not the most favorable matchup. So we'll see what he's really made of out of a fighter in this I guess in this card for the first time.
Yeah, and the thing is with Derrick Brunson too, and Derrick Brunson's kind of that guy. He's like for you football fans, he's kind of like that slot cornerback who always makes it onto a team, and he'll last like 2 or 3 years. Plays really good special teams, but is never really good enough to be a starter. And then he gets cut, and then another team picks him up because they need a veteran on their team who can be solid and can play special teams. Does it for another year or 2, then gets cut. That's who Derrick Brunson is. He's solid. He does what he has to do. He's a solid athlete, but he's never really been over the top in anything. Not really that impressive. But the thing is too, like it's weird. Like I feel like every time Derrick Brunson fights, he doesn't really get a ton of hard matchups, right? And I feel like every time I think that he might win, he loses. So I will. But with that being said, like what you said, I think this may be too big of a stage for Israel Adesanya for him to kind of make his way to the top, right? Like, and I get it for the UFC. This was kind of MSG. It was a perfect launching point for him. I have my doubts with you as well. but you never know. I mean, he's a great athlete, and I'm not sure how much he's been training on his ground game. Really, it's ground defense, right? Like
Yeah.
I hope he doesn't try. I hope he's one of those. He's smart enough to know what he's good at, and doesn't try to get involved and then try to, even if he has been training as a grappler and in wrestling or BJJ, whatever he's doing, try to get too involved in that because he's just not going to be a guy who's as skilled on the ground as Derek Brunson. So we'll see how that plays out. It'll be an interesting fight to see. Um, so moving on to the next fight, which was supposed to be. So I think this is this a co-main event or no?
This is the co-main event.
It's a co-main event. That is. Oh my god. So this was supposed to be.
It's a good co-main event, though.
Yeah, it is pretty decent, and it was
a matchup that was inevitable. It should have happened a while ago, and it's finally happening.
Yeah, and this is the number 3 contender in the 185-pound division, Long Island's own, the pride of Nassau Community College, Chris Weidman, who is an All-American wrestler.
Out of Baldwin, New York.
Out of Baldwin, New York. What's up, Baldwin?
But currently resides in Dix Hills.
What a sellout. Come on. So, yeah, of course, Long Island's own Chris Weidman, who's, of course, is from the Longo and Matt Serra camp. And so he is he's number 3 contender, and he's facing Ronaldo Souza, who's actually the number 5 ranked contender in this division. Really solid fighter as well.
Yeah.
Of course, all these guys out of Brazil are always very impressive. And so this is supposed to be Luke Rockhold, who, of course, is from the Khabib camp, and obviously another top fighter out of AKA. But, of course, he got injured, which I feel like is a normal occurrence nowadays.
Yeah.
In any of these cards, there's always like 1 or 2 guys that kind of end up falling out. But they got a decent replacement for him this time. And
I think it's more than decent because Chris Weidman and Luke Rockhold already fought each other.
Yeah.
And last time they fought, I didn't think it was too competitive. I thought Luke Rockhold pretty much dominated the fight. I'm actually more interested in this matchup, believe it or not, because I feel like Chris Weidman and Jacare Souza should have fought before with each other, and they've never fought each other, so this was bound to happen. So I think this is a great co-main event, to be honest with you. I think it's actually better than Rockhold versus Weidman.
Really?
More intriguing to me.
That's
Absolutely.
very interesting. That's very interesting.
Because, like I said, that Rockhold and Weidman fight wasn't competitive enough for me to see it again.
That's true, and that is a very good point that you make. Who stylistically, who do you like more in this fight, and why?
So this is an extremely tough fight to call right here. So in Jacare Souza, you have probably one of the most decorated Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioners in MMA, along with obviously Damian Maia. But Jacare is probably up there as one of the best BJJ practitioners. Obviously a black belt, but not probably like a 2nd degree, 3rd degree black belt in BJJ. And then you got Chris Weidman, who's also a recent Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt under Matt Serra, and Matt Serra's under Renzo Gracie's Jiu-Jitsu system. So, but like I said, this isn't BJJ, this is MMA, and in terms of MMA, Chris Weidman's got some of the best grappling in MMA. It's a tough fight to call because I believe the takedowns are going to cancel each other out. Their wrestling and grappling is going to cancel each other out. I don't believe that Jacare Souza is going to be able to take down Chris Weidman. And I don't think Chris Weidman is going to want to take down Jacare Souza and get in the ground with him and be in his world or be in his, I believe, guard or anything like that. So I believe there's going to be a stand-up fight. And if it goes to stand-up, it's really 50-50 at this point. And if it's my pick, like I said, if it's a pick-em fight, I am going to pick Chris Weidman in this fight. Even though Chris Weidman has almost lost every fight in New York except for the one in Long Island where he beat Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah, which is my boy now. Yeah.
Yeah, Jacare's chin. I haven't seen Chris Weidman just get like knocked out, like standing up, like complete knocked out. Jacare, I have. His chin to me seems a little weaker than Weidman's. That's my opinion, but it could easily go. It could go any way. This fight. This is a really tough fight to call.
Yeah, and it's one of those fights too. It's the first time in a bit actually where we've seen two guys at a co-main event that have actually very similar styles, right? They're
Right.
both ground guys that are, especially with Chris Weidman too. I think, because he's obviously had he had a rough patch there for a while, right? I mean, he
Yeah.
lost to Luke Rockhold, lost to Yoel Romero, lost to Gegard Mousasi, and hey, those are
Those are
three
all top
really good
guys.
fighters.
Yeah.
Those are all top guys, so it's not anything to scoff about. But I mean, he did lose three fights in a row,
He did.
and when he beat Kelvin Gastelum, I thought that he did get back to his roots, right? He really concentrated on the ground game, and he got back to what he's best at, and I think he's really going to be challenged in this fight because he's facing another guy who's a fantastic, obviously a Brazilian jiu-jitsu practitioner and a guy who's super skilled on the ground. So it is going to be interesting. I think it is an interesting and it's a cool matchup to see. I'm worried that some people are going to get bored a little
Yeah,
bit, especially the
it has
casual
the
fans.
potential to be a snooze fest. It definitely does have that potential.
Yeah, it does have the potential a little bit, but I think for the more diehard MMA fans, they'll probably enjoy this a bit, or enjoy it a lot actually. But yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I do agree that they did get a good replacement, and yeah, I am looking forward to seeing this fight. I'm sure most of MSG will be going crazy for Chris Weidman. He's a New York guy, Long Island guy, so I'm sure the crowd will be rocking for this one. Um,
Who are you picking,
so
man?
shit, I was hoping you were gonna let me go on that one. Um, you know what? I'm gonna say Chris Weidman's feeling good off his win off of Kelvin Gastelum, and I think he's gone back to his roots. I know that I saw that he was back at Renzo Gracie training again, probably rolling with Danaher and those guys, and again he's. I think that was also a big part of why he won is he linked up again with John Danaher.
Yeah.
He got away from that for a while, and he got back to his roots, went back and trained and made a game plan with John Danaher, and I think it helped him tremendously in the Gastelum fight, and I think he's sticking to that. I think it'll help him in this fight as well. And I think he stays on his roll. A little bit of a comeback for him. I think he's having a little bit of a renaissance in his career. Saul said that he wins this fight. I don't know if it goes. It may go to decision, but we'll see. I'll take Chris Weidman this one though.
So interesting fact. So how we mentioned that Chris Weidman's last win is against Kelvin Gastelum.
Yeah.
That was back about last year.
Hmm.
Ronaldo Souza is coming off a loss. His loss is coming off of Kelvin Gastelum.
That's right. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that.
But then again, MMA doesn't work like that. There's no such thing as like real MMA math. Like one person beats this person, that means that guy's going to beat that person. Like it doesn't really work like that. MMA is a sport of matchups, as you'd say. And I believe Chris Weidman, the only reason he beat Kelvin Gastelum is purely because he had a smart game plan. He's way bigger than Kelvin Gastelum, so he basically used his size to
Yeah.
beat Kelvin Gastelum. I mean, when I watched that fight, even though he beat him and he submitted him, I still wasn't convinced that the best fighter won that fight or the more talented fighter won that fight. I came in with that fight thinking that Kelvin Gastelum was a better fighter in that fight, but Chris Weidman had the better game plan in that fight and was smarter, and that is why he won. So
Yeah.
just because he beat Kelvin Gastelum and then Ronaldo Souza lost to Kelvin Gastelum, that's not a guaranteed victory for Chris Weidman. Like I said, it's all about matchups. Chris Weidman is not going to be able to implement that size and strength over Jacare Souza. They're about the same size, and if anything, Jacare Souza might be a little stronger than Chris Weidman. So
he's bigger. He's definitely a bigger
yeah.
guy.
So that his tactics against Kelvin Gastelum is not going to work against Jacare Souza. So we'll see. Like I said, that's why I'm not completely convinced based on MMA math. It can go either way, but I'm going to pick Chris Weidman though, like I said before.
Okay, cool. Well, I guess we're both going with Weidman on that one then.
Yeah.
So all right, so moving on to the main co-event of the night, and this is Daniel Cormier, who right now is the reigning heavyweight champion of the world, versus Derrick Lewis, the Black Beast, who we also had to preview for UFC 229, who is a number 2 contender in the division. And as we said, I cannot believe this is actually happening, because we were talking about him versus Volkov and how that fight that Derrick Lewis had versus Francis Ngannou was just a horrible fight. And, Derrick Lewis, I don't even know what to say. He obviously had a great post fight. The amazing part is, after he won that fight versus Volkov, you texted me immediately, because we were texting back and forth. You're like, watch out for his post fight press conference.
Right.
His post fight interview. He says crazy stuff, and of course, he had the most ridiculous post fight interview, and he became instantly a superstar because of that. And in addition to the knockout as well. So which catapulted him to, of course, getting the shot. It's a heavyweight title bout. I'm going to let you go first. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? It's really short turnaround from UFC 229. Obviously, Daniel Cormier is obviously he's the favorite in this fight.
Yeah, and deservedly so.
What do you think is going to happen?
Deservedly so, Daniel Cormier is the favorite. What a lot of people forget is that when Daniel Cormier started his MMA career, he actually started as a heavyweight, not light heavyweight. He was actually undefeated as a heavyweight. He's beat already some of the best heavyweights in the world. He beat guys like Antonio Silva, Josh Barnett, Frank Mir, Roy Nelson, and obviously recently Stipe Miocic. Daniel Cormier is undefeated at that weight class. The only reason he went to light heavyweight was because at the time, his training partner, Cain Velasquez, was a UFC champ at heavyweight. And he was already beating everyone, and there was only one place for him to fight, was for the title against Cain Velasquez. So that's why he elected to move down to light heavyweight. So this is a guy that basically should have been fighting at heavyweight this whole time.
Yeah.
Daniel Cormier, so Derrick Lewis is just a straight up brawler. When I see this fight, I don't really see it being too competitive. Daniel Cormier has already fought guys with power. Obviously, Anthony Johnson is not in the heavyweight division, but we all know he has heavyweight power.
Yeah.
We've seen what he's done to Anthony Johnson. I mean, and also if you can handle Stipe Miocic like that, I don't see him having any problems with Derrick Lewis. He's just going to take him down and ground him out and exhaust him. It's not going to be very competitive. I mean, probably going to end in the second round. That's my pick. Via some sort of rear naked choke or something.
Yeah, which would be very, it would be pretty funny. Well, interesting considering, of course, Khabib, who is Daniel Cormier's teammate at AKA, won technically by rear naked choke, although it was really a neck crank.
Right.
But yeah, they're both wrestlers, and Daniel Cormier is head and heels above Derrick Lewis as an all around fighter. I mean, it's not close. But with that being said, Derrick Lewis always does have a puncher's chance because he the most dangerous knockout threat in the UFC, right? And of course, that importance gets raised up the higher you go in weight classes. And him obviously being a 260-pound guy, having almost 25 pounds on Cormier.
So here's the difference. Actually, funny you mentioned that. So the limit, I believe, is 265 is the limit.
Yes,
I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Daniel Cormier has no problem making that weight class. He'll come in around like 240 at most.
Yeah.
Derrick Lewis is one of the few heavyweights that actually has to cut weight to make 265 on the dot.
That's true. That's true.
He actually has to cut weight to make 265. So come fight day, this guy's like probably 285, 290 maybe. So he's going to have like a good 50 pounds on Daniel Cormier.
Yeah, which is a lot. Which is a lot of weight. But I mean, and the thing is too, it's just so interesting because Derrick Lewis, I can't even think about anybody who is in a similar situation. This guy raves about and talks about all the time how he doesn't train that hard. He doesn't even care about being great at what he does. He's just doing this to support his family. Hey, at least he's being honest about it, right? He's like, look, I'm doing this to support my family, do this to make money. I don't really care about legacy and all that stuff. Which, I mean, it's fine, whatever. He says he has heart. That's his thing. So he has been taking his cardio very seriously. He has been training hard.
In the past 3 weeks.
3 weeks, though. And if anybody knows, 3-4 weeks is not going to make the world of a difference for anybody, especially at this level. I mean, you're talking about one of the best fighters, not just in the heavyweight division, in UFC in general.
Yeah.
Daniel Cormier is a tactician in every way, in what he does. And, one of the best ways to kind of, I guess, offset a guy who is bigger than you, and who may be stronger than you, of course, is proficient wrestling, right? Proficient ground game. And Daniel Cormier, of course, he's an All-American wrestler. So he's
an Olympian.
An Olympian, I'm sorry. That was even more important. He's an Olympian. He's at the top of his game. Obviously, I don't think this is going to be close as well. I'd say it could go 2 rounds. Although it could just go 3 to 4 rounds, and Derrick Lewis is just kind of hanging around because he doesn't have a tough chin, right? Like he
might lose via like cardiac arrest or something.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Or
he
like
might
exhaustion.
He might knock himself out, honestly, because he is a tough guy, and I don't think he's going to go down easily. But and I like him too because he's a good guy, right? He's funny to watch. He's funny to listen to, and he always does have a puncher's chance. But
and
highly unlikely.
I believe it's like, listen, at the end of the day, whether Derrick Lewis wins the fight or loses, he still comes out a winner at the end of the day. For people that don't know, this is a guy that basically he had a college college football scholarship, lost it, went to jail. After he came out of jail, was a truck driver for many years. Yeah. And then found the sport of MMA. So this guy completely, turned his life around and, became a millionaire basically after UFC 229. So at the end of the day, he's a winner. And
he just signed a deal with Popeyes, of course.
Yes.
Because he made a pretty funny joke at one of the previous press conferences with Daniel Cormier about Popeyes, and he's a good dude, man. He's a good dude. Turned his life around. I'm always rooting for him in general, of course.
Me too. But, I want him to win, but I don't think it'll happen. But I'm rooting for him. Yeah,
and hey, and another thing to bring up too that I said before, and that's why I wanted to see Luke Rockhold fight as well as, man, Javier Mendez and AKA, man, they're on a freaking roll, dude. You have Khabib, obviously, who's now a superstar, who's the lightweight champion. Daniel Cormier is one of his other fighters, of course, who's fighting on this main card. You, of course, have Luke Rockhold. Man, if Daniel Cormier can come away with this one, which I think he most likely will.
Let's not forget Cain Velasquez, too.
Yes. Oh, and Henry Cejudo. Isn't Henry Cejudo?
Henry Cejudo is not a part of that camp.
He's on AKA.
He's got his own. No, he's got his own team out in Arizona.
Oh, that's right. I don't know. I forgot why I was thinking that. I think I was thinking that because he.
But Henry Cejudo and Daniel Cormier were on the same Olympic wrestling team.
That's what. Okay. That's what. I knew there was some connection there.
Yeah.
And I think Henry Cejudo is also. I'm pretty sure he's an Ali Abdelaziz client as well. I think.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, there is some connection there, but AKA is definitely on a roll. So yeah, I mean, look again. Going through this card versus going through UFC 229, it's obviously not as exciting. It's obviously not as crazy, but I mean, hey, there are some interesting stories in this. But I mean, at the end of the day, we're gonna keep it real, right? It is what it is. I'm not entirely sure why they couldn't have gotten more brand names on this card because it is MSG, but it is what it is, and we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. I mean, if you're a diehard fan, you're gonna want to watch this. Basically, not everything's gonna cater to your casual fans. I mean, we only have like UFC events that happen like that 1 or 2 times a year at most. So you gotta, some of these cards come along, and I still think, I mean, in the main card, 3 out of the 5 fights are worth watching for sure.
Yeah, definitely. And I think even if you aren't crazy about this card, it at least is kind of like an entry point to a lot more stories down the road. Of course, John Jones is making his comeback.
Yes.
I think in December. Am I right?
You're right.
December, January. Yeah,
He'll
in
be
December.
eligible, right.
He'll be eligible, and he's going to be making his comeback. And obviously, if Daniel Cormier wins this fight, I think it's probably a precursor to him hopefully having his rematch with John Jones again. So we'll see, man. And of course, there's the whole Brock Lesnar. So Brock Lesnar is the eventual next fight, I think, for Daniel Cormier, which I don't understand. I don't understand this at all. I don't understand why there's this huge hype about Brock Lesnar, who's probably going to fail the USADA test because he's clearly on steroids.
No, the UFC will pay off USADA.
That's true. They probably will. I don't understand why Brock Lesnar is coming back, but he's also going to be there at the fight on Saturday night. And I'm sure if Cormier wins, he's going to get into a ring and do some stupid shit like he always does. Yeah. But some interesting stuff down the line. But yeah, I mean, that is what it is. Anything else you looking forward to about this card in general, Chef?
I mean, not really, to be honest with you, because I don't think, aside from the Daniel Cormier fight, winner of the Chris Weidman, Jacare fight, I don't think any of those guys are going to fight for a title next. I think they need a couple more fights to get there. I'm also a little interested to see where the prospect Israel Adesanya stands with the rest of the division. Is he ready to take that step up in competition? Can he face a grappler? So those are things I'm looking forward to.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, man. So that's UFC 230 in a nutshell. And I guess what we'll do is obviously the fights are on Saturday night. We'll do a recap next week, probably a quick short one. Just kind of go over what happened with the fight and what to look forward to going forward. But yeah, man. Hey, thanks for joining me to go over all this. A lot of stuff, not only in the UFC, but in MMA world in general, is occurring in the background. And look forward to kind of tracking this stuff going forward. Thanks a lot, man. Appreciate you taking the time out. Always a pleasure. I know it's late in Brooklyn. I heard the sirens going off. Hope nobody got killed. Hope everyone's safe. We're just chilling out here in Southern California and nothing happening.
All right.
But yeah, man, take it easy, and I'll talk to you next week.
All right, man. Sounds good.
Take it easy, man.
Later.
Hustling, 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 hustling. Every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling, every day I'm hustling.